Antarctica. Does it exist? Is there a pyramid there? Antarctica is extremely weird and mysterious, not just because for some reason the entire world has decided that it has to be protected and secluded from the rest of the world, even despite being the largest desert on the planet, but because there are so many strange anomalies that have to do with this continent. Good news, deranged viewer, if you have been wondering these questions, then you clicked on the right video, because today we're going to be talking about the Antarctica Iceberg. This is a chart that has a lot of really weird things on it, from cryptids like the Ningen to just overall strange facts. And then we're going to be getting into more historical things and weird conspiracy theories about the continent of Antarctica. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for 560,000 subs on here, and we will go ahead and get into the video. Starting off at tier 1, we have blood falls. So this is just a waterfall that's coming out of this glacier called Taylor Glacier, where the water comes out this deep red blood color. This is actually not blood, believe it or not. It's just this iron-rich, super salty water that seeps out of this subglacial lake, and then whenever it emerges, the iron oxidizes and turns into this weird red color. Pyramids. So there is a mountain in Antarctica called the Pyramid. It looks a lot like a pyramid. Obviously, if you've looked into any Antarctica like lore, a lot of people like to point to this as being like a legitimate pyramid that was created by someone or something. However, this peak is 4,150 feet, and I cannot stress this enough. If this was actually a pyramid, I know it really does look like one, but if this was created and it's like an ancient structure, it would have been made by some sort of extremely powerful unknown civilization, because like the tallest pyramid that we have that exists today is only 480 feet high, and this pyramid would have had to have been, you know, over 4,000 feet tall. So scientists say that this is just a naturally forming mountain. But dude, if it was real, there would be a lot of implications. It doesn't belong to anyone. So this is the only place on the planet where land is not officially owned by any specific country. Instead, Antarctica is governed by this international agreement known as the Antarctic Treaty System that was established in 1961. This basically means that this is the only place on Earth where every country agrees not to fight, but instead share everything for science. What's weird is, why does the entire world not agree on anything except for this one place? Seems odd. Nazis in Antarctica. So this is actually a true thing. There were Nazis in Antarctica. There was this historical expedition that took place back in 1938 to 39, where Germany, during World War II under Hitler, sent an expedition to claim this territory and establish a whaling station. They explored this region and they named it New Swabia. It is this really otherworldly looking region in Antarctica. They have these jagged peaks. It is now currently named Queen Maud Land. And yeah, this place is really crazy looking. There are a lot of conspiracy theories that have came out of this expedition, but also like other things that happened later on, like weird submarine activity and, you know, stuff at the end of World War II, but I'll talk about that here later on. All you need to know right now is, yes, there were in fact Nazis in Antarctica at one point. Caves. So Antarctica, believe it or not, is 98% covered in a thick ice sheet that on average is about 1 mile thick. Because of this, there is an outrageous amount of hidden land underneath the ice that I will talk about later. But there's more of a conspiracy theory thing about caves in Antarctica, about how there's like giant caves or one giant cave in the South Pole region that leads to Hollow Earth, where there's the mythical city of Agartha, and it's like one of the only entrances to Inner Earth or Middle Earth, Hollow Earth, not the Lord of the Rings place. But once again, we'll talk about it later. Tier 2, Ningen. So the Ningen is this cryptid creature that kind of looks like a mix between a human and a whale. It's like a human whale humanoid thing. The origins of this thing came from the Japanese version of 4chan. That's how the rumor started. So it's not like it's like a real great source for, you know, finding creatures. But the story goes that there was this Japanese Japanese whale researching vessel that kept coming across these creatures that were not quite human and not quite completely whales off the coast of Antarctica. And they have these really eerie looking features. Like they kind of have the body of a whale and a whale tail, but then on the front end they have these human-like arms and hands and kind of a human-looking face. Sometimes though they also depict them as like these little like white seal-looking things that only have legs and walk around on land. But the story goes that the scientists don't publish their findings because this would completely discredit their team. Which, like, yeah, if you're posting, you know, the picture of the no-armed little seal guy, I think it would kind of discredit your science team. Annual marathon. So there's actually this real thing called the Antarctic Ice Marathon, where these people will run a full marathon a few hundred miles away from the South Pole. It looks pretty cool. It costs like $20,000 to do, but whenever they're running, the temperatures range between like 14 to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, so that would be pretty brutal. Largest desert on Earth. So this is just the fact that the interior, and like most of Antarctica in general, is the world's largest desert on the entire planet. It has this status because it gets very little precipitation, less than 2 inches per year, and the air is so cold that it holds almost no moisture at all. And so this place is actually, believe it or not, a barren wasteland, and it's just kind of incredible that penguins live here at all. Actually, penguins can drink salt water. They have this like special adaptation where they have this suborbital, I can't say the word, gland that's located above their eyes, and it like filters out excessive salt in their bloodstream because they're drinking salt water, because they live in the desert. But obviously, like all noticeable life sticks close to the coasts or just the islands to survive. But like the furthest living inland creature are the emperor penguin. They can live like 100 miles inland. But if you really look at Antarctica and think about what this means, Antarctica is 3,400 miles across. So it's really crazy to think about. But there's a place on our planet that basically has 3,200 miles of complete desert wasteland with no visible living thing. It is so insane. I mean, this is basically like walking all the way across the United States and not seeing another living thing. That is crazy. And so this raises the question, why does this massive desert wasteland need so much protection from the rest of the entire world? It just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Antarctica Atlantis. So this is actually a theory that Albert Einstein liked and believed in. This is the theory that the lost city of Atlantis was actually Antarctica, and that Antarctica once had a civilization there that had like relatively normal temperatures. This goes along with this scientific theory called crustal displacement that was proposed by a guy named Charles Hapgood. This theory goes on about how Earth's crust can like shift relatively quickly and even move an entire continent at like a really fast rate whenever something like a catastrophic event happens, and it would trigger a movement like this, such as something like a comet impact or a large earthquake. But I think more likely they would refer to something like the magnetic poles shifting would cause something like this, which is something that's kind of happening right now. Our magnetic poles are moving a lot quicker than they have in the past. At least that's what they say. They might just always move fast like this and they haven't been paying attention. But anyways, this theory goes on about how Antarctica maybe moved really quick, or the poles moved really quick, and it caused this massive freezing of this continent. Tier 3, Hollow Earth. So I'm sure you guys have heard of Hollow Earth, which if you think Hollow Earth is epic, then you should totally go to Bunker Branding / Psychopoly and get you a Hollow Earth shirt. Sorry, this one's wrinkly. Very epic. But Hollow Earth theory is just the idea that Earth is actually completely hollow or much more cavernous than what mainstream science has told us in modern day. And that maybe there's this massive inner world in these caverns or inside of Earth, and maybe even an entire ecosystem. Though this theory has been dismissed by most of science, it kind of has a cult following around it. Some point to places like Antarctica as having one of the only entrances on the Earth to get there easily, or other places like Mammoth Caves. Some people say the North Pole too, and other like big cave systems in like on the world. But some people think that historically different leaders from the past, such as Hitler himself, was trying to get to a place inside of Hollow Earth, and that maybe even figures like Admiral Byrd found it. But this theory was suggested by historical figures like Edmund Halley, who has to do with Halley's Comet. Did he name Halley's Comet? But officially, this scientific theory has been debunked because of gravity measurements and such. But it is popular in some parts of fiction, like Journey to the Center of the Earth, very epic book, and the old movie is really cool too. And then also some of the Godzilla movies. That's where the monkey guy came from, right? The gorilla, King Kong. Oh wait, so did Godzilla, right? Yeah. Ice Church. So Antarctica actually has 8 churches, one of which is a permanent Catholic chapel that is carved out of ice at one of Argentina's bases. This chapel is located 800 miles away from the South Pole. The structure is called Chapel of Our Lady of the Snows. The walls are carved out of ice, and it's really cool and crazy to think that something like this could exist. Hidden land under Antarctica. So this is what Antarctica looks like on a map regularly. As you can see, it looks like one continuous landmass. This is actually what the land looks like without the ice. As you can see, it is a lot more broken up and not continuous like most of our maps show us. So directly beneath Antarctica's ice is this entirely lost landscape of never before seen by human things, like entire mountain ranges are buried, like the Gamburtsev Range. There are hidden valleys with rivers that are probably flowing beneath the ice, ancient ecosystems that haven't seen sunlight for millions of years, and there's no telling what we would find if we could get down there. It's likely there's stuff down there that was like preserved like a time capsule. I also read this thing recently that the ice cap on top of the land is so heavy that it presses the land under the sea level, and if the ice had melted or was removed, then the land would kind of rebound like a ball that you push underwater. Moving on to Tier 4 Piri Reis map. So this is really crazy. It blows my mind every time I learn about it. This is a world map that was compiled in 1513 by an Ottoman cartographer, Piri Reis. So I think right now we only have like a third of the map, but it is so crazy looking and detailed. What's really weird about it is that it appears to accurately depict Antarctica as not having ice, and it shows like what the land would look like if the ice was removed in some areas, as if this guy for some reason had seen Antarctica without the ice on it. Some speculate that there was either, no ice there when he got there or something back in 1500, or that this guy had some unknown knowledge that we don't have today from some past kind of more advanced civilization. Some people do, however, say this doesn't depict Antarctica and that this is rather just the southern tip of South America, and they kind of bent it around and made it look like Antarctica. But the guy Piri Reis, who made this map, wrote about how he based it on more than 100 old maps, some of which came from the Library of Alexandria before it was burned. Maps that may have been rescued and taken to Constantinople before the burning of the library. And so this is also another one of the reasons why people think Atlantis was Antarctica. The Bloop / Julia. So both the Bloop and Julia were these nicknames that were given to these ultra low frequencies that were recorded by these underwater microphones, and they seem to both be coming from the area near the coast of Antarctica. In 1997, the Bloop was originally heard as this mysterious sound that led scientists to speculate that because it sounded similar to whales, but it was much louder, it's actually the loudest sound that's ever been recorded in the ocean to date, but even deeper than whales, they thought that maybe this was actually a living creature, and maybe it was some sort of unknown sea creature we haven't discovered yet. People have even created a mock-up of what they think the Bloop would look like. I love this creature's design, and I do hope it is real. But later on, they decided that the Bloop was more likely an iceberg breaking off of glaciers in Antarctica. So Julia also was one of these low low frequency sounds. This was recorded in 1999, and it was roughly around the same area as the bloop. It was famous because it kind of sounded more like a woman's voice, and because of this, people speculated that this was like a female version of the bloop. But once again, it was also an iceberg rubbing against the ground. More likely, they don't know for sure. It's still kind of a mystery. Ancient rainforest with dinosaurs. So I added this one to the iceberg because I wanted to talk about dinosaurs. But this is like the fact that Antarctica was likely this lush green continent that was like a temperate rainforest. And we found famous dinosaurs such as the Cryolophosaurus there, which was one of the largest theropods from the early Jurassic period. It was 20 feet long. It looked super cool. It had this crest thing on its head, which was likely like this brightly colored display for mating reasons. Another cool one is the Antarctopelta, which is basically just a classic ankylosaurus. Classic. And then also the Australopithecus, which is closely related to the South American Megaraptor, which is another cool dinosaur. Mummies in Antarctica. So this is referring to how we have found different animals that seem to be perfectly preserved in Antarctica, but this is not artificially done. This is a natural process that happens because the continent is extremely cold and dry. So whenever animals die, they don't just rot. They instead will sometimes mummify, and we'll find things like mummified seals and penguins. And we found crazy things, like we found an entire colony of penguins that are like 800 years old that look brand new and fresh. And so that's really crazy. Tier 5, prehistoric giant spiders. So this is kind of like a creepypasta-like story. There was this guy online, and it's another online story, where he was claiming that his dad worked on a base in Antarctica at McMurdo Station, and that he was a doctor there, and he started to uncover that there were secretly these massive prehistoric spiders that were lurking around the continent of Antarctica, often described as being like larger than dogs, and that people kept getting attacked by them. And then as he worked there, he discovered that different world governments were feeding these spider things by giving them humans, and then they were genetically modifying them so they could use them in warfare. They were planning to deploy them in some sort of warfare. And anyways, it's more of a creepypasta. The guy claimed it was real, but I mean, 4chan. 700-year-old soot. So whenever scientists were drilling through these ice core samples, they found this soot that appeared to be 700 years old that was preserved in the Antarctic ice, and they traced it back to originating from the New Zealand area. They believe this soot came from large-scale burnings by the first Maori settlers in Aotearoa, which is modern-day New Zealand. They think these people got here roughly around the year 1300, and they immediately started doing these large-scale land clearing fires. And what's crazy is this soot likely drifted 4,500 miles away to then get frozen in Antarctica. Garden of Eden. So this is just another theory that some people like to say, that maybe the Garden of Eden from the Bible was actually Antarctica, and that maybe the garden is maybe not the continent itself, but inside of inner Earth, and that the Earth is hollow and you can only access hollow Earth from the giant hole at the South Pole. And yeah, Antarctica shrinks your brain. So this is kind of crazy. Studies have shown that spending an extended period of time in Antarctica can actually lead to temporary shrinkage of specific parts of your brain. Not because it's cold or anything like that, but because the extreme isolation and confinement and just the overall monotonous environment, because, you know, there's like unchanging landscapes, can limit your sensory stimulation, and this causes your brain to just not get big, it gets smaller. You got to be somewhat stimulated or no big brain. I try to stay overstimmed. But they say you can combat this with like physical exercise and even using like virtual reality. People in there playing what's the VR game, the monkey tag game. They're playing monkey tag in Antarctica. They're playing Phasmophobia VR in Antarctica. Phasmo VR in Antarctica? That would hit hard. That would go pretty sick, actually. That'd be pretty cool. God forbid a scientist have a hobby and go to Antarctica and play Phasmophobia VR. Am I right? He's trying to get down with some Beat Saber and he punches a hole in the airlock, and then Organism 46B breaks in and rips his arms off. Whoopsies. Hitler escaped conspiracy. So this has to do with Antarctica. Bear with me, I promise. So the official narrative for Hitler's death was that on April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life in his bunker in Berlin, Germany. There was also kind of a weird situation where he ordered his own men to burn his body after he died, so he wouldn't become a spectacle like Mussolini had just been not that long ago. So after he died, his burned body was found by the Soviets. And what's really crazy is, although the Soviets found his body, his remains, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, publicly suggested that Hitler had escaped to Argentina, which is something I just learned about. That is so crazy. So fast forward a month and a half after Hitler's official death. It is now July 16th, 1945. This guy named Sabo, this Hungarian exile who was living in Argentina, published this news article in this Argentina newspaper called La Crítica. He published this detailed account about how he claimed he saw this ghost convoy of submarines that included the U-530 submarine, which is historical, that's a real submarine. And he had seen this ghost convoy carry Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, and Martin Bormann to a secret Nazi base, New Berchtesgaden, in Antarctica. Or he also says they may have gone down to Patagonia and hidden them down there. But because of these articles, there has grown this huge rumor about how Hitler didn't actually die, and rather he escaped and went to either Argentina or Patagonia, or this so-called secret Antarctica base, New Berchtesgaden. It's about that name. We will continue with this topic here in just a second. Tier 6, Nazi Base 211. Like I said earlier, we know there was historically Nazi presence in Antarctica in 1938 to 39, where they claimed the territory and called it New Swabia, although there was no permanent military base established. Really, the only bit of evidence that we have for there being some sort of Nazi activity after 1939 was this real thing that really did happen, where the U-530 submarine left on final patrol March 1945 from Norway and was just gone for 4 months. And then the submarine surrendered in Argentina on July 10th. Why did the submarine take 2 months longer than it should have to go from Norway to Argentina? This brings about a lot of questions. Why did they surrender so far away from where they were expected to be? Why were they 2 months late, like I just said? Why did the crew destroy all the records? They destroyed all the records they had on their submarine. Maybe because the war just ended and they want to not indict themselves in more crime. And why also did the crew have no consistent explanation for where they actually were? Anyways, we will talk more about this U-530 submarine when we talk about Operation Highjump, because that will later be part of this conspiracy. It is worth noting that the narrative that the Soviet Union told, that they thought that Hitler had escaped to Argentina, a lot of people think Stalin was saying this not because he was actually genuinely suspicious, but rather he wanted to disinform people because he had more strategic goals. But there is other weird stuff, like in modern history, the Soviets had the skull of Hitler, was supposed to be his skull, but in 2009, we figured out it was a fake. But also, at the same time, we did tests on the jaw, and everybody says the jaw is Hitler's jaw because it didn't have, meat in his teeth, and he was a vegetarian. I don't really understand it completely, but they're like, yes, the dental records line up, so it is his jaw. So, I don't know how to feel about it. It's really weird that Stalin was acting up. I mean, Stalin, We're not going to get into Stalin, so moving on. Opium Bird, also known as the erosion bird. This was this viral internet thing back in 2023 where a bunch of people were making these kind of giant, ghostly, eerie-looking bird humanoid things with AI videos, and these birds were just kind of standing there, kind of weirdly moving and shaking, and usually they were standing next to a person in the mountains. The first original post of these opium erosion birds was created by Dre VFX, and he had this caption on the post that said, "Bird-like beings discovered in Antarctic mountain range, undiscovered until recently." And so, some people, this started a rumor and people were like, these are real, because this was kind of early into the AI stuff, and people were like, erosion bird is real, we discovered it in Antarctica, and it kind of caused more lore later on about how these birds look so extravagant and, you know, kind of hypnotizing looking because they're trying to hypnotize people so that they can eat them. And they dance for the people, and people are like, wow, look comfit, you're looking pretty fly, and then they get eaten by them. That's my breakdown of it. So, frozen plagues. So this is just talking about the potential of ancient microbes trapped in Antarctic ice surviving for thousands to millions of years. And if the ice melted, it could release this bacteria or these viruses that could be capable of infecting modern ecosystems and humans. Research shows that this actually is possible. They have successfully revived different deep ice things from the permafrost. There was this 50,000-year-old virus that they revived. I don't know why they're doing that, but it's kind of scary. Can we not? I mean, do we need to? I don't really see any reason why we need to. I would like a real-life Jurassic Park. I will say, if that's what they got to do to get that, then science be sciencin'. I was trying to think of a good Jurassic Park reference, but I couldn't think of one. Life be lifin'. Life be finding a way. Used to be called Australia. So back in the 1500s, there was this weird thing where Australia was thought to be a continuous part of Antarctica, and it was like all one big continent. And this continent was this legendary landmass that they called the Southern Continent, or Terra Australis. But in 1824, the name Australia was officially transferred to the continent that we know today as Australia. And this left Antarctica without a fixed name until it was officially named in 1890. Crazy, the more you know. I never heard of this until just now. Until I did research on it. I'm not learning it as I'm reading this. I did this research. Operation Highjump. So this was a secret operation where there was this massive US Navy expedition to Antarctica in 1946 to 47, right after World War II. This was where they took 4,700 people, 13 ships, dozens of aircraft, and the primary goal was to establish the base Little America the Fourth, and they were going to test this large-scale military operation in polar conditions. But this was an unusually large scale for a military operation in there, and they also had a rapid withdrawal. And this kind of later on fueled this popular conspiracy theory that was actually so popular that the Wikipedia article for Operation Highjump has been vandalized multiple times to say things that the operation was canceled midway through because they had been attacked by some sort of advanced technology. Because there is this conspiracy theory that, you know, the Nazis had a permanent base down there in the Drawning Modland area, and that operation was actually to destroy that base. However, whenever the US military went there to fight these Nazis, they for some reason had this unknown advanced technology, maybe like flying saucers or something like that. In addition to this conspiracy theory, there is the tale of Admiral Byrd, who was the leader of the expedition, and how he flew in an airplane, which he did fly in an airplane above Antarctica, but people add to the story and say that he flew inside of Hollow Earth where he found Agartha, and he saw things like woolly mammoths and then a lush green jungle, and finally the city of Agartha where he saw giants and Nazis and Nazi giants and a white monster, and he drank a white monster. And anyways, what was I talking about? Oh, the point is, this was published as like a secret diary that he allegedly had where he wrote all this stuff. And, I mean, it's this journal's word against history. So it is weird. Admiral Byrd had some weird stuff that had to do with Antarctica. He did say things that kind of makes you think that he was referring to more land beyond Antarctica, but I'll talk about that like in the next topic. Yeah, anyways, that's about it for Operation Highjump. Weird military operation. It was big. Anyways, Tier 7, Ice Wall. So the ice wall is this thing that people always talk about whenever they're referring to flat Earth. They claim that Antarctica is not a continent like we see on the map, but it is rather this massive circular barrier that surrounds the edges of Earth that kind of prevents people from falling off the edge of Earth. And, you know, personally, I don't believe this. But I do think that it's kind of fun because people will make maps of the ice wall map and then like other continents beyond it. I really like this one. This is beyond the ice wall map, and they have different continents like Atlantis, Lemuria, the continent of Odin. Horus is like trapped in another wall area. It's like Horus is walled off. That's funny. They got the abysmal ocean. But anyways, in reality, Antarctica has these huge ice walls. They are real. They have these big ice shelves that kind of form along some of the coast that are insane looking. Some are even taller than 300 feet high. So these things are absolutely massive. Fun fact, speaking of like really thick ice, the thickest ice in Antarctica is roughly 16,000 feet thick. That's a lot. That's huge. Is that right? I gotta look that up again. Yeah, it's true. That really is true. That's, oh my gosh. Lake Vostok Google reviews. So Lake Vostok is this massive freshwater lake that is buried 2.5 miles beneath the ice in East Antarctica. This lake has been isolated for millions of years. It might have extremely unique life and like completely different ecosystem that has been isolated from the rest of the world for who knows how long. But if you look up Lake Vostok on Google Maps, people have left a lot of funny reviews saying that, you know, they've been swimming in this lake and that, you know, that nobody's ever seen. And they constantly talk about Organism 46b, which is like the joke about the online story about Organism 46b, this alien creature thing that is in Lake Vostok. And yeah, Lake Vostok, not the greatest place to vacation, but it's all right.
Say hello to my little friends.
Gold volcano. So Mount Erebus is one of only 2 active volcanoes on the entire continent of Antarctica. What's strange about it is it constantly emits this gas and mineral particles that include gold dust. And basically gold dust gets blasted way up into the air, and it's estimated it shoots off roughly 80 grams a day of gold, which at today's rate is worth about $11,000 every day in gold. So, however, it would be really cool to get this gold, but it is impossible to collect the dust because it would cost more to filter out millions of cubic feet of air to get the dust than it is worth. But there are mummified penguins there that are pretty easy to get, I've heard. I bet you could get a lot for an 800-year-old penguin, am I right? That's a joke, that's a joke. Don't actually. Guys, you're putting words in my mouth. You're twisting my words. Random woman grave. To summarize this without going too far into this, it seems like the first human to ever set foot on Antarctica was from some random woman that was found alone on an Antarctic beach where her remains were found roughly around 1819. So these are the oldest human remains we've ever found on the continent. This predates all known landings on Antarctica by multiple decades. This absolutely shocked everybody when they found it back in like 1980 because it broke the timeline for exploration and it raised a lot of unanswered questions like who she was, how she got there, why there's no records that mention like the expedition there. What we know for sure is she was an indigenous woman, likely from the Chile area, and what probably happened was there was an unrecorded voyage where the party accidentally drifted and then ended up wrecking their ship, and then maybe she drifted over to Antarctica, which like if you get there, I don't know how you're going to survive, you know. It is worth noting that at some point there was this Spanish ship, San Telmo, that got lost in the Drake Passage back in like 1819, and some of its wreckage was discovered on Livingston Island where she was found. But it is still a big mystery that they don't know definitively like where she came from. There's no official explanation, but why was there a woman found alone on a remote Antarctic beach? That's crazy. Pilot detained 2 months for flying to Antarctica. So this was a situation that just happened back in 2025 where this American teen pilot named Ethan Go was on this mission to be the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents to raise money for cancer research. But he was detained for 2 months by the Chilean Antarctic Air Base after he changed his flight plan mid-flight due to what he claimed was bad weather and also instrument malfunction, and he ended up landing in Antarctica without authorization is what the charge was, but it's not really what happened. Basically, he landed in part of Chile's Antarctic territory, even though nobody owns anything apparently. But his landing there was treated as a serious violation because they claimed that he violated the Antarctic Treaty System thing. And then he was confined at King George Island's research station for 2 entire months until a deal was struck with the judge. It kind of seems like maybe he wasn't detained there that entire time, but he couldn't leave because of bad weather, so he ended up being there for 2 months. But I mean, it seemed like he could have flown out, but they just didn't let him. Anyways, they made a deal where they agreed to drop his charges if he donated $30,000 to children's cancer research. And at first when I read this story, I was under the impression that this guy did this because this was part of his mission and it was kind of just like for publicity or whatever. But after reading into it further, I feel like that's not really the case, and this guy actually needed to land there in Antarctica, and maybe this was kind of politically charged. I don't know why they're so strict about this whole situation. It's really weird because at first he asked the airbase if he could land there, and he got like written authority in a text message. I don't know if that's written authority, but the airbase leader person, I can't remember who exactly it was, said yes, you could land there. And so he did, and it was completely normal, and they allowed him to land, and he was going to take off again. But then suddenly, I don't know if the people at the airbase were talking with someone, but they just immediately changed their mind, didn't let him leave, and they arrested him and detained him. And it's just really odd. I think it's worth keeping in mind that some countries, such as Chile, like to make claims to Antarctic territory, even though they don't technically own it. And countries will do things to try and solidify their claim, such as setting up different bases and stations and airfields. And countries like Chile and Argentina will even go as far as having women flown there so they can give birth. So it kind of looks like there's like natural Antarctican born citizens from their country to like establish permanence or whatever. And you know, by arresting someone that's in your territory, it kind of does demonstrate that politically you have authority over, you know, controlling your region. But I'm not saying that's the reason why he was arrested, but it does seem like there's something more than just, oh, what did he do wrong? He got permission. It's really weird. There's something even stranger about this thing. So he has been released for I don't know how long from Antarctica, and the charges have been dropped allegedly. But there's this really weird thing where we haven't heard from Ethan Gyo for the past 6 months. A lot of people are like speculating where he is, or maybe he has been taken to. What we do know is that news sources have said that he got on a Navy ship and was taken to Chile so that he could probably go back home to the US. But we haven't heard from him in the past 6 months. And as of recording this, it is January 7th, 2026. It's been 6 months since we've heard from him. People in the comments on this stuff are speculating that, you know, he saw beyond the ice wall, he saw the land beyond there, and that, you know, he may have made it to Agartha. I mean, God forbid a boy have some hobbies. You know, dude got in a plane, flew to Antarctica, and you're gonna blame him? Like, honestly, like, give him some leeway. Bro's trying to raise money for cancer, and you guys decide that he's a threat to the Antarctic Treaty System so that you guys can protect what? What are you protecting? Massive desert wasteland with no animals for thousands of miles. You don't understand. There is very old soot there. We gotta protect it. What's the deal? I don't get it. Anyways, people know where he's at. I don't know where he's at. It's really weird. I'm assuming he's probably back home in the US, and maybe he made a deal like with the lawyers that he's not going to post on social media because he could get like in trouble for being like, "Hey guys, I made it to Antarctica." And then his lawyers were like, "Please don't do this. NATO is involved." I don't know. Would NATO be involved? They might not be. Moving on to Tier 8, Antarctica Nuclear Explosions, Operation Argus. So Operation Argus was this secret nuclear grouping of tests by the United States back in 1958, where they did these 3 high-altitude detonations in the South Atlantic Ocean. And the reason they did this was to study if it was possible to defend the homeland from Soviet nuclear missiles by exploding like these small-yield nuclear bombs, like a multiple of them, up at high altitude to blind their radars. And to clarify, this did not take place on Antarctica, but rather about 1,000 miles north of Antarctica. But these nuclear tests have kind of fueled the whole Nazi Antarctica base thing, as some people like to say they didn't happen in the ocean, but rather directly over the drowning Maud land area, and that they actually were decimating the surviving Nazi base there, and they blowed up the UFOs and the thing. They took out the thing. That'd probably be the only way to get rid of it, honestly. Organism 46b. So this was an online story / creepypasta by a guy named Michael Forsyth, and to summarize the whole thing, it was about this group of researchers in Antarctica that were drilling through the ice to get to that massive subglacier freshwater lake that's 2 miles down called Lake Vostok. That would be really cool to get to, where they then encountered this creature called Organism 46b, and it was described as like this 33-foot wide creature with 14 arms, and it kind of looks like a squid, and it had these strange abilities like shape-shifting and mimicking human form, using this neurotoxic venom that paralyzes humans from a distance away, and even like detaching its limbs, and then those arms can like move independently. And anyways, it was this highly intelligent predator that had adapted in this environment completely independent from the rest of life on Earth, and it kind of makes it like an alien-like creature. And in the story, it kills several of the science members of the team, where at the end Russia captures the creature and is going to use it as a biological weapon and like place the eggs from this squid in freshwater lakes all over the US, and they would all just like bloom and probably take over the whole world. That'd be really bad. Magnetic South real location. So this is a crazy fact I learned. Magnetic South is not even located on the continent of Antarctica, but it is rather located 400 miles away from the Antarctic coastline, 1776 miles away from the geographic South Pole. And it's still moving, just like the North Pole, the magnetic North Pole. They're both moving significantly fast. It's really weird. But yeah, isn't that crazy? Magnetic South is not on Antarctica. Very weird. Carl R. Dish. So this was an American scientist that disappeared from Bird Station in Antarctica in 1965. It seems that this guy just kind of fell off the face of the earth. He was an ionospheric physicist, and one morning in May, he stepped out of the radio noise building where he worked at every day to return to the main station complex just 1.3 miles away, and it was like a routine trip that Dish had made well over 24 times since working at the station, and there was even like a rope that was ran from one building to the other so you know where you're going. However, Dish didn't make it back to the main station in the normal amount of time that it took him to every day, so the researchers there sent out a rescue party to go find him, where they discovered a trail in the snow where he had gone. But the search party ended up running back to refuel, and after returning, couldn't find his tracks due to snow drifting and the wind. And what's really unfortunate is the temperatures dropped to negative 79 degrees Fahrenheit while he was missing, and then 6 days later, they called off the search because they presumed he was dead, because like, how would you survive a night in negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit? But his body was never found, and his disappearance remains a mystery to this day. Some like to say that maybe this was some sort of cover-up to hide something that he found, or that he never died and he is now inside of Hollow Earth. Antarctic Godzilla. So this was a weird thing that happened back in 1958. There was this Japanese whale research vessel named the Soya, which you wouldn't catch me on the Soya ship, if you know what I mean. Anyways, this boat was conducting research around the Lutz Holme Bay area in 1958. It was a normal day. They were looking for whales and such like normal, when at first they thought they saw an oil drum that another boat had abandoned drifting towards them. But then they realized that it was actually moving on its own towards them, and they described it as being some sort of creature swimming in their direction. Its head had roughly the same shape as a cow or a horse, and the top of its head was round like a monkey. I don't know why they need to mention that, but they always mention that the top of its head looks monkey-like. It also had large eyes and pointy ears, and an engineer that observed the creature more closely discovered it had dorsal spikes like Godzilla on its back. Also, after analyzing, they decided this creature likely was meant to live on land because it had this long, dark brown body hair, kind of like a woolly mammoth. The captain of the ship, who was a fan of the Godzilla movies, nicknamed this creature the Antarctic Godzilla, which, when in Rome, Antarctica. What's also interesting about this story is later on it went on to inspire the cryptid, the Ningen, which is, the thing we talked about earlier, the human whale thing that's pretty creepy looking. But this thing was pretty creepy looking in general. I mean, it looks like a monkey, horse, Godzilla creature, woolly mammoth, and there's nothing else about it. They just saw this thing once, allegedly, and it was reported. Unlike the Ningen, this thing actually was documented, at least somewhat, so kind of crazy. As far as what this thing actually was, it could have been like a seal dragging something. I honestly don't know what it is. Anyways, Antarctica, extremely weird place. Please, I would love to go there. If I made enough money off this video, I would go there. 10 billion views and I'll go to Antarctica. Is that fair? Anyways, seriously, thank you guys so I would go actually if I made enough money off this video. I would definitely go to Antarctica. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is, thank you guys for watching. You are very deranged. There's something wrong with you because you stuck around to the end of this video. And because of that, I salute you. Thank you very much. Thank you for 560,000 subscribers on here. I could never have this office space without you guys. I have my very own energy sword, and that's thanks to you guys. But thank you guys so much for watching my content. You have created a career for me where I get to research things like Antarctic Godzilla. So if you have any specific things that you would like me to talk about, comment videos that maybe you'd want to hear. Maybe I one day will not do an iceberg video, but these are just so much fun. I love icebergs. As for merch, if you want some Psychopoly exclusive merch, you can get the Hollow Earth shirt at bunkerbranding/Psychopoly. But that is about all I have for today. Thank you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.